And it was something Mark said last week that when I listened to the recording back, I wished that I'd listened a little bit more carefully when he said it. Because quite often, guys, when you're on a pod, when you're in our seat, you're hearing the other person talk, but you're thinking about what you're going to say next, as opposed to actually really listening to what the person said. And Mark said something last week, which was, is tax really the problem if you got rich anyway? Right? So I don't know if you guys recall this, but Mark basically called bullshit on me saying, or all of us basically saying, we get taxed too much in Australia. And I saw it in the comments, people going, I'm with Mark, or I agree, I'm calling bullshit on the tax thing. And I've been thinking about that sort of on and off throughout the week. You know, Mark's point was basically, if you guys are wealthy anyway and you've made millions of dollars, why is tax the problem? And I was like, that's actually an interesting thought, because the truth is we did make millions of dollars inside of a country where we feel overtaxed, right? And that's like, for a capitalist to stop for a minute and assess that, and it made me think about it a bit more. And I wanted to sort of just run something by you, which was like, I really reflected. One of the things I reflected was that I didn't really feel like I was wealthy until I went liquid, right? Like when I owned all these buildings on the Gold Coast, I didn't feel wealthy, even though on paper I was. Like I had all this equity in these buildings. And I just wanted to break down the reality of something. Now, I know people who are struggling financially might curl their toes here for a minute and go, this fucking guy is so out of touch. But I want to, which we heard, by the way, in the comments, some people are like, these guys are no longer in touch with the average Aussie. And I'm like, dude, we do this to help the average Aussie. But I want to run the numbers on something for you. So when I got liquid, when I sold these buildings, all of a sudden, this wealth that had been created through real estate was now cash. And it wasn't just hiding in the walls of these ugly buildings in industrial states on the Gold Coast, right? It was actually reflected as a bank balance. But one thing that got me thinking is, one of the buildings that I sold it for $5 million on the nose. Like I sold for $5 million. I had an income of $250,000. And when I did the math on this thing, right, like I put into ChatGPT, because at the end of the day, the reason we buy these buildings and we go down the road of real estate is, at the end of the day, the dream is not to work, right? Like we want to be able to just retire and have time with the kids. So you work it out, you go, okay, I needed to pay off a $5 million building to have a gross income of $240,000 or $250,000, which after tax is about $166,000. Now, when you think about that, and I thought about it in reality, I thought, okay, let's say somebody buys a building for, say, $2.5 million. They spend 15 years to pay this thing off. You've actually invested $3.6 million you've had to earn through whatever means in post-tax income and the payments from the building, to have $166,000 income in 15 years from now. So what is $166,000 worth at that time? And you really start to think, like, that's an extremely high bar through real estate, right? To get there. Mark, you want to say something?
Yeah, but the way I see that is that it's two different issues. Like, you chose to pay off that property, so from a allocation of capital point of view, you're looking back on that now and saying, well, that was a poor allocation of capital, because if I had to just leverage the property, potentially my cash on cash return would have been much higher. So if you had done what most Australians do, which is use leverage, your cash on cash return probably would have been higher. But you chose to pay off that property when you could have bought gold, you could have bought Bitcoin, you could have done something else. So do you know what I mean? Like, it's like you still made money on the property. You still made capital gains on the property. If you had to leverage the property, your cash on cash return would have been much higher than the end yield. I still think they're two separate issues. I still think that we're fortunate enough to be able to make those decisions, to buy those properties and to ride the capital gains, right? Because, again, it's not because we're geniuses. It's because from 1980 to 2020, interest rates went from 16% to 0%, and we were able to ride the capital growth on the back of that, especially if we leveraged. To say that you paid them off and then you were left with $160,000 or $200,000 yield, well, that was potentially a poor allocation of capital to pay it off.
No, my point more is like, I guess my point is that even if you use leverage, I'm just talking about the average punter out there, whether they pay it off, you need to be at that level in the millions of dollars a year of real estate to produce a livable income. Do you know what I mean? Like what I'm getting at is that for the average person, like in Australia through real estate, you need millions of dollars of real estate for the average punter. It's just such a high bar when you just step away and think about that for a minute.
And this is why we keep coming back to the debate about property and whether it is the right investment moving forward. And the more and more that you cut the numbers, the answer is no. Like if you had the benefit of starting out 20 or 40 years ago and you could buy property, because remember, all the property that was purchased 20, 30 years ago is now well and truly positively geared at higher levels than what we paid for it. But if you're looking at property now at 2 to 3 mil and the plan is to buy property in order to retire off the dividends, it's never going to happen.
Yeah, this is what I'm getting at.
Not from a pure investment play where it's hit and hope, we buy and sit and pray. Unless you force value on it, that's a whole different conversation. And Adam did force value on a lot of those buildings as well. So there's a nuance and a why section in that conversation also. A, leverage, or B, outright, and C, and B, if you're going to force value on those properties, well then you leap probably a hell of a lot quicker than just sitting there and then in a prey capital growth situation.
We've had this conversation before, Adam. I think we had this conversation maybe 2 years ago in relation to your property portfolio, that we spoke about the fact that you could have taken all the equity in your properties and leveraged that up and bought $100 million worth of property going back, 5, 6, 10 years ago. And you would have had, because you're such a great, because you have the ability to, like James said, to take a property, increase its value, because you tripled some of the values of your property through time and improvements.
Well, yeah, I mean, I had the benefit of COVID and the government dropping interest rates to zero. I had all the ducks lined up. It's just the reason I started to think about it is, and this will lead into the story about the 5% home deposit. Like this 5% home deposit scheme has basically reduced the entry point by 3/4 for a lot of Australians. Instead of needing 20%, they now need 5%. And the government, this was interesting. I was reading on realestate.com.au or the Daily Mail, one of the two. The government predicted, listen to this, the government predicted that in their estimation, the drop of 20% to 5% deposit for young Australians would result in a 0.5% increases in home prices over 6 years. So